And good evening. Welcome to our CAF Warbird Tube. It's a show where we talk about warbirds, history, World War II, flying, and much more. This show is sponsored by the Commemorative Air Force. It's the world's largest flying museum. This nonprofit membership organization has been preserving and flying historic aircraft for more than 65 years. CAF's mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. You can support the organization through donations, membership, or by volunteering your time and talents. Visit commemorativeairforce.org for more information. You can see all the different units that we have around the United States, and we're going to visit one of those units tonight. I'm your host, Steve Bliss. Thank you for joining us. We welcome you if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or on Zoom or GoToMeeting. We've got a lot of different social media platforms for you to share our content. And if you would, just take a moment to hit the like button, share or subscribe, and we'll make sure that you get the latest information on all of the Warbird Tube programs that are coming up. As I mentioned, we're going to visit one of our units, and this one is the Jayhawk Wing in Wichita, Kansas, and we'll be talking about their UC-78 Bobcat. But before we dive into that topic, if you have any questions for us during the show, all you have to do is type that into the chat box or the comment section, depending on what platform you're watching on. Leah Block is in Houston, and she will relay those questions to me. We'll either try to answer them inside the presentation, or we'll save time at the end, and we'll answer them then. So if you have any comments or questions, just type them in, and they'll get forwarded to me, and we'll discuss them with our guests. And speaking of our guests, I'd like to welcome Ben Sorenson and Justin Coletti from the Jayhawk Wing. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Good evening, Steve.
Well, let's start by talking a little bit about the Jayhawk Wing itself.
Sure. So we got started in November of 1987. It was suggested by an astronaut, the name anyway, was suggested by astronaut Joe Engel. He was originally one of the founding members of the unit. And in August of 1987, actually the unit purchased its first aircraft, which was a Beech C-45G, and named it the Silverhawk. Obviously, we've been around since the 80s. We've changed airplanes a couple of times. We currently have 3 aircraft right now, two under restoration and 1 undergoing annual, which is the Bobcat. Yeah, Ben, if you have any input.
We have 2 airplanes we're rebuilding. One was donated by a previous member when he passed. His family donated. That's a Ryan PT-22. And we have another airplane we're being rebuilt. It's a Fairchild PT-23. So the only one we have flying operating the last year or so is our 1943 Cessna Bobcat, UC-78. Sometimes it's called a T-50. The T was for training and the UC was for utility and cargo. That's our primary airplane now. What else would you like to know about it, Steve?
How many folks are in the unit today?
We have about 50 members right now.
All right.
And as usual, the 50 members mean we have about 20 active members.
That's true. That's actually a pretty good ratio. Tell us a little.
Yeah, so go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we switched the slides here. This is a really neat piece of history that goes along with the unit as well.
Yeah, so our PT-23 was donated, correct?
I'm not sure how we got it. We talked the national into the airplane a long time ago. It was flown up here, but it was not really in flyable condition. And they spent about 2 or 3 years rebuilding it, making it to where it was a practical flying airplane. And it was named Miss Mickey after Mickey Axton, who was a WASP lady, and she was one of the founding members of our wing.
That's awesome.
You know, Steve, not to kind of skip ahead here, but coming from, I'm a little bit younger than Ben, not as pretty as Ben, but I am younger. Growing up, I heard about the WASP all over the place. Touring the country with my grandfather, going to air shows. I had actually never met a WASP, so it was kind of unique for me to end up in a unit that was put together and founded by a WASP. And you hear about their feats in the wartime effort, and it's interesting to see. My son will get the chance to be able to be around that, and I think that's probably one of the coolest parts of this unit. It probably keeps me coming around to know that there's some, I don't want to say direct history, but it has a direct link to a person instead of just an Army unit or an organization, which is certainly more unique, I think, than most units.
Yes. There are there are a number of units that can trace their lineage back to a certain figure in history, whether it's the Tex Hill wing or some of the other ones. Joe Engel, obviously, with yours. Yeah. So, but having that direct connection really gives you a unique opportunity to share not only the story of the Wasp, but Mickey's story herself.
Absolutely. She's obviously gorgeous too. I mean, got a good looking airplane, good looking gal, fits perfectly.
There you go. Well, let's talk about the UC-78 Bobcat in particular. That's why we're here tonight. What's a little bit of history on the airplane itself in early production and in World War II.
Okay, it was originally certified by Cessna. It's somewhere around 1939. Wasn't a very popular airplane at all. It's a fairly low-powered airplane for a multi-engine airplane. But they offered it to the Army as a twin-engine trainer. The Army wasn't particularly interested, but the Canadians were. So the Canadian whatever they were called, the Canadian Air Force at the time, purchased like 50 of them, and they were delighted with them. It's a two-engine airplane with two 275 horsepower Jacobs engines, so with unfeatherable propellers. So if it loses an engine, it has very poor performance. But the service ceiling single engine is like 5,000 feet, which worked out real well in Canada and it would in the lower parts of the United States. After Canada had the airplane for a while, the Army Air Corps decided they really needed an airplane of this class, and they bought several of them. I don't recall how many right offhand, but I think it was like 100 airplanes, and it turned out to be a really good trainer in preparation for like a B-17, which is a tailwheel airplane, primarily controlled by differential power. In other words, pulling one engine back and pushing the other one up enables you to steer and control the airplane. So they were really happy with it. Cessna wound up building around 7,000 Bobcats. My take is that's what kept Cessna in business during World War II, because that was really all they were building. And as of today, we're members of the Bobcat, the Flying Bobcat Association, and I believe there are in the neighborhood of 11 flying Bobcats left in the world. So we feel very fortunate to have one of them.
So close to Cessna too. I mean, Cessna's right down the road.
Yes, it was built right here in Wichita, on the east side of town. So it hasn't gone very far. Our airplane was originally, obviously, a World War II trainer, and the history is a little blurred for a while. We obtained the airplane, I believe, in 2001, and at the time, as you all know, if you do an annual inspection on engines, the compression should be roughly acceptable as 60 over 80. Put 80 psi in it, and it should hold 60. And our airplane held about 35 on each cylinder when we got the airplane. It was ferried up here from Texas. Obviously, both engines kept running, or it wouldn't have maintained any altitude on one engine. But right now, it's operating real well. We've been flying it about 50 hours a year, taking it to anything within, we stick to about 300-mile range. We've had it down to Dallas. We've had it up to Parkview, Missouri. It's been in that type of range. It only cruises about 125 miles an hour on 30 gallons an hour. So it works out to about 1 gallon per mile. And it carries about 4 hours of fuel. So at 125 miles, and you got to leave a little bit of room. The Commemorative Air Force prefers us to land with some fuel in the airplane. So we can comfortably fly about 300 miles, and then we've got to stop and get gas. But we stick to about a 300-mile range. What else can I tell you?
Well, at that speed, you get a good view of the landscape going by.
And another advantage is we get to see a good view because we're flying low. Typically 5,500 feet is about as high as we ever go, which is a single engine ceiling. So if we lost an engine, we could basically maintain that altitude.
Another advantage about the aircraft too, Steve, is it's got a smaller cockpit for a multi-engine vintage trainer, so to speak. So say, for example, you want to get checked out in this to lead to bigger aircraft, which is we've talked about and kind of pushed on the idea of the podcast here is it's not expensive to learn to get checked out in compared to other aircraft. You're not going, hey, let me go get 50 hours or whatever in a B-25 or a 24, and then I'm proficient in the aircraft because or a multi-engine like that. It gets to the point where you look at proficiency over cost. How much are you paying to get to that level of proficiency? So in the, I guess, the stepped process, this is the cheapest advanced trainer you're gonna be able to find. Think of it as twice the pilot, half the cost.
There you go.
And it's also, as far as I know, it's the only multi-engine tail wheel airplane that was used as a trainer that's still available. The Beech 18 is a pretty common airplane also, but it has two 450 horsepower engines. So instead of burning 30 gallons an hour, you're burning more like 50 or 60 gallons an hour. So it's a little more economical.
Right.
And obviously vintage airplanes aren't cheap.
No. You bring up the Twin Beech, which is sort of synonymous with cargo haulers post World War II, and in fact, they're still out there performing today. A lot of utility roles. Matt Youngkin flying one of the air shows. But what kind of roles did the Bobcat play after the war? We're finding that a lot of the airplanes that were saved had some sort of role after World War II that allowed them to keep operating until they could get into the hands of museums like the Commemorative Air Force.
Okay, if you had a little bit of money after World War II, I believe the airplanes were sold in the neighborhood of $250. So people who were interested in little airplanes, relatively little airplanes, could buy one for $250, and most of them would continue to be used for trainers. It was about as inexpensive a multi-engine trainer as anything. There were very few at the time. You think of a trainer like a Cessna 310, it hadn't been built yet. So it was really the only multi-engine trainer available, and there were thousands of them out there. So most of them were put in flight schools, and that's where folks got their multi-engine training. Unfortunately, even as a small multi-engine plane, it's still a pretty big airplane. It's got I've got to think offhand, about a 54-foot wingspan. So the average 40-foot hangar can't accept it. So most of these airplanes were left outside. I mean, the investment was only $250 or $300. So why build a hangar? They parked them outside in the rain and the wind and the snow and the hail. And it didn't take long before there weren't very many Bobcats around. And that's continued that way to this day. That in the last, well, I got involved with Bobcats in 2003. So about 20 years ago. And at that time, there were about 20 airplanes left. And every year, another one goes away.
Yep.
So, but that was pretty much, they were all used for trainers. They're not a very good cargo carrying airplane. They're just too slow. They don't carry much. But they were a real good multi-engine trainer.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about the structure of the airplane itself. Are we looking at all metal? Is there wood, fabric covering? Walk us around the airplane as to what the different materials were that put together a UC-78.
Okay, well, as you can see behind us, we've got the airplane. The doors open. It was another nickname for it was Bamboo Bomber because it was primarily made out of wood. And I'm sure all you history buffs know there wasn't a lot of metal available there. It was usually used for war equipment, tanks and armament and heavy airplanes. They were all metal. But this one, it's primarily wood. The fuselage has metal stringers. The engine mounts are obviously metal. But other than that, the entire airplane is made of wood. And that was one of the problems with leaving it outside. The water got in the wood, it rotted. Very difficult to repair wood structurally so that it's reasonably safe. The entire airplane is covered with fabric. In World War II, it was cotton. Now, pretty much everybody uses stitch fabric. It's a polyurethane. It's relatively easy to install, and it lasts forever. The fabric on these airplanes are just amazing. But so if you come up to the airplane, no matter where you look at it, it's fabric covered with a paint, and then whatever decals and obviously decorations are put on it. But it's basically a wood airplane with fabric covering.
Now you mentioned wood, and it's called it, or its nickname is the bamboo bomber. But did they really use bamboo or a different kind of
No,
wood?
it was spruce.
Spruce.
It was almost that was a problem with bamboo bomber. It was not didn't have any bamboo in it, and it was not capable of carrying bombs. So that nickname popped up somewhere and kind of stuck. The Canadians, by the way, called it a crane. We call it a Bobcat.
It's interesting to bring up conversations like that too, because been around the world a few times. I did a couple of tours in Afghanistan, and multiple times in Afghanistan, coming up with different nations using different aircraft names. Twice I've seen C-47s fly over my position while on patrol in Afghanistan. And you still see some of the old vintage World War II aircraft being used, like you mentioned before, in the cargo utility perspective in modern day units. I think I know Brazil used the Bobcat for a while after the war as well, too, as well as Canada. I don't know if they had a nickname for it, but I know Brazil ordered a bunch of them after the war as well.
That's interesting. And again, it just goes to the mission of the aircraft post World War II that's allowed them to still be in our flying arsenal today. With the trainer, was it always just a pilot trainer, or were there provisions for bombardier training or navigator training?
No, it was always for pilot training. Generally, they had an instructor in the right seat, a student in the left seat, and 2 or 3 students in the back seat. So there was one flying, one instructing, one flying, and 3 observing. But it was always used for pilot training. Navigator training was done by other airplanes.
Which is obviously good nowadays when you get to the training aspect of getting into bombers. You can take multiple students up at a relatively low cost and be able to get that training. Or just if you want to go up and check out the local area and come by the hangar, et cetera, you can also get in and get the real feel instead of being stuck, as they would say, in the back of the aircraft.
That's right.
Yeah. Everybody's close. This is not a big airplane, but it's comfortable. Yeah. It's with 2 people in the back seat and two crew up front. It's very, very spacious. Talking about training, though, it's a perfect airplane to get yourself into some pretty current airplanes. C-47 DC-3 was also a multi-engine tailwheel airplane. I know I was at an air show a few years ago, and a fellow walked up and said, "I remember flying these." And I said, "What's the next step?" And he said, "Next step after a Bobcat was a B-17. That was the next step."
Wow.
Well, obviously, it turned out to be a pretty good trainer.
Now you mentioned, Justin, you mentioned they're doing pilot training for some of the heavier tailwheel airplanes. Is that a role that the Bobcat fills for the Jayhawk Wing?
I don't know if we've done specific bomber stuff, but it can help lead you into that.
None of our members who have been flying the Bobcat have moved into the bigger tailwheel airplanes. And one reason is the nearest big tailwheel airplanes are hundreds of miles away from Wichita. So it's kind of inconvenient, but we'd be open to have it. If somebody wanted to get a precursor to the big airplanes, they could give us a call and we could work something out to give them a chance to fly our airplane a little.
That'd be better too, as Ben's mentioning, than saying going from a Stearman direct into a B-17, B-25, B-24, right, somewhere in that area. We're the next advanced logical step in that pipeline. Not to mention the safety aspect. We mentioned proficiency in the beginning. I imagine going from a Stearman to a B-24 is a little bit of a different jump. One that I'm a pretty intelligent guy, but I'm probably not going to make that jump. Might be a little overwhelming.
Yeah. Just a little more complicated.
Yeah, just a little.
Well,
compared to a standard Stearman, Stearman has a mixture and a propeller, it doesn't even have a propeller control. It just has a mixture, right, and a throttle. And this has 2 mixtures, 2 propellers, 2 throttles, 2 carb heats. It gives you lots of things to look at when you're not flying.
Well, Ben, you've been involved in the maintenance of aircraft for a number of years. What are some of the more unique challenges that you run across with the Bobcat?
the wood.
Yeah.
Keeping the wood in, the glue that was used back in 1943 was great for 1943. And if you only wanted the airplane to operate for 10 years, it would have been great. It was never envisioned to be flying 75 years later. So a lot of the effort is finding these weak glue joints and putting them back together. But otherwise, it's a pretty standard maintenance airplane. It's got 2 engines. It's got 275 horsepower Jacobs engines. Relatively easy to find parts. I'm trying to think of what problem this.
I'll tell you what's kind of a complicated thing is when Ben says, "Hey, I can't reach this over here. Can you crawl up into this wing?" And we're relatively small guys. It takes 2 of us to do some of the maintenance sometimes. I'll tell you, I've been upside down, sideways inside this aircraft. This last weekend, he had me pulling cables out of there that I didn't know I could fit into some spaces. So don't let Ben give you the smiles and the good looks. He likes to make everyone do all the tough little maintenance parts.
Well, I prefer to be a manager. I like to delegate, and quite honestly, working on the airplane, you learn an awful lot about the airplane itself. It gives you a lot of confidence. For instance, control cables, we have had no problems with control cables. They don't, they're 1999 cables. They're holding up just fine. Probably the biggest problem we have is we don't fly the airplane enough. Airplanes like to be flown. And we find that a lot of the problems we have primarily with the engines is they just aren't being used enough. Flying 35 to 50 hours a year. We do it all the flying during the summer. So from November until April, it basically is maintenance. It's just setting us up for having time. The engines want to run. I guess that's what I'm trying to put it. So, but as far as maintenance, it's got normal airplane maintenance. It's a retractable gear. It's got flaps. It's got all the systems of a modern airplane and the problems that go with them.
Let's talk a little bit about the paint scheme that's on this. A lot of the trainers had high visibility markings on them to show off that they were a trainer, but just looking at yours, it looks like it's all pretty much solid gray color.
Yes.
I think our paint scheme goes back to the name of the Air Force Base is escaping my head right now, but I believe it's configured as if it was part of the original base that it was at. It'll come back to me at some point. It'll pop in. I can't remember it, but it's in an original Army Air Corps colors.
We've been invited to go to a flying at Altus Air Force Base in Western Oklahoma.
Right.
And it was a Bobcat training base. So they're really excited about us coming. There just aren't any.
Yeah.
And I know of a couple in Seattle, a couple in Los Angeles, a couple in Ohio, but to go to Oklahoma is a major effort.
Yeah.
But the paint job, it's a pretty standard paint job. It's painted silver with the stars and bars. You can see it over my left shoulder there. That's just the way they were trying to keep the time to build these airplanes to an absolute minimum.
Right.
So they kept the paint jobs on the airplanes that stayed in the United States pretty simple.
All right. We want to got a couple of folks we want to shout out to. We've got viewers from Texas, Nevada, Georgia, California, Sydney, Australia, all joining us tonight. For those of you who checked in, thank you. We certainly hope you're enjoying the show. And again, if you have questions, just go ahead and type those in the chat box. One of our viewers is asking if you need help with maintenance, and that would be a universal question for any CAF unit. The answer is yes, right?
Yes, there are lots of little things that can be done by anybody. Obviously, we'd prefer you have a little bit of maintenance experience, but we have enough opportunities that if you start from zero, we have lots of things you can do.
That's Steve. That's actually a really good point. The unit here isn't big enough, or I don't say big enough. It isn't too large that the aircraft are too complex that you can't work on it. I'm not an A&P guy. In fact, until I'd come to this unit, I'd never done any maintenance on an aircraft. I'm actually going to K-State to become a commercial pilot and to get my A&P cert. And most of the work I've done on aircraft have been under the guide and monitoring, we'll say, or managing, as Ben likes to call it. here at the unit. And it's small things, hey, this aircraft, it's got to get washed. It's got to get the oil change, and it's got to, it's got to make sure all the bells and whistles and buttons are all squared away.
Okay, what's another question? Ask something easier.
All right, here's an easier question. How does a pilot become a pilot on the Bobcat? How do you
Okay,
get checked out?
the Commemorative Air Force requires that you be at least a private pilot, that you have, I don't remember the exact number, but 100 hours of tail wheel time is probably a good place to start. The rules now are you need 80 landings in the last 365 days and approximately 20 hours in the airplane. If those, so you'd have to be, it's a multi-engine airplane, so you'd have to be multi-engine. Like we talked earlier, there's very few multi-engine tail wheel airplanes. So we can't ask you to be a multi-engine tail wheel pilot, but we can ask you to be proficient in tail wheels and proficient in multi-engine. And those are the two biggest things.
On the
And
screen, Steve.
if some, and what was that?
I was going to say, I've got it on the screen. I don't mean to cut you off, but basically to put it in easy terms, pilot's license, tail wheel, and then multi-engine. We have instrument rating on there because it will help. But as Ben will tell you here, as he continues, it's not required.
Right. And so very rarely do any of CAF's aircraft fly where you need instruments, but it's
Right.
always a good backup, no matter if you're flying a CAF aircraft or any airplane for that matter.
And we limit it to day VFR, obviously VFR. Because it's a multi-engine airplane, the CAF will now let us fly it at night, but we don't. We only fly it during the daytime. So if you want to learn how to fly, give me a call.
There we go. By the way, what's the story of the picture we're looking at right now with the Bobcat in front of a WASP hangar?
The WASP has a reunion every Memorial Day for the last 8 or 10 years.
Mhm.
And we took our airplane down to the WASP Museum and gave some of the old WASP ladies rides and anyone else who wanted to ride. It was very popular. The WASP did not find it to be a very useful airplane. They just were not, they just didn't like it. Almost all their operations were single engine, and they did, and I think there was a Ronca twin engine airplane also, which they preferred. I don't think there are any left, but we were down there for a weekend.
Nice. That's the museum at Sweetwater, Texas, and it's if you're in West Texas, that's a spot you have to stop. They are continuing to build up that museum, and they've got some expansions going on. And just put in a plug for the WASP Museum. They've been good supporters of CAF, so check them out on the web and on Facebook. The WASP Museum in Sweetwater, Texas. What are you mentioned this is going to the show in Sweetwater, but where are some of the other places that you take the airplane, or even better, that you're planning on taking the airplane this year?
Well, we try and bring it to the Dallas Air Show, the CAF Dallas Air Show. That's in sometime in October. They move it around. We've had it down there once or twice. The Tarkio, Missouri has a really nice air show in the middle of the summer. We've had it up there several times. It's, again, very popular. We're going to, what did I tell you, the Air Force Base a little bit ago.
The one right up the street here is the one in Wichita.
No, the one in Oklahoma.
Altus.
Altus Air Force Base.
Yep.
We're planning on going there next September. Last year we went to El Reno, Oklahoma, Chickasha, Oklahoma, Okmulgee, Oklahoma. Those are the ones that are supposed to have air shows this year. We take it up to the Commemorative Air Force Air Show in Olathe at their, it's just outside of Kansas City. That's pretty much reliable air shows we go to. We were invited to go to one in at Oklahoma State this coming weekend, and it got canceled. But if there's an air show around Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, or Nebraska, we're going to try and go.
Sounds good. For those who may not be up on the terminology, what's a Jayhawk?
I would.
It's a
I would know,
bird.
I would know that. I'm a Wildcat guy. I'm from Kansas State, so we don't talk about
It's
Jayhawks.
a bird, and it's the it's the name of the University of Kansas athletic teams. They in the post-Civil War era, Jayhawkers were the folks who went out and stole cattle and horses from their neighbors. They were not a positive group, but very ambitious and very energetic. That's all I know about Jayhawks.
That's obviously not reflected in this unit. Just want to make a side note there, but
And we went through some of the speeds, but one of our viewers, Norman Clark, is wondering what the your best rate of climb, stall speed, and best glide speed are, and top speed of the airplane.
Okay, I call it a 90-mile-an-hour airplane. Best rate of climb with both engines running is 90. Single engine, we also use 90. We approach the airport at 90. So 90, that's our main number. Rate of climb with both engines running, probably about 800 feet a minute or so. With one engine running, whatever altitude you're at, that's as high as you're going. But it doesn't come down very quick. It'll probably hold 100 feet a minute coming down, so it'll go a ways. Stall speed, gee, off the top of my head, I'd say it's probably about 55. It's got a big wing and it's not all that terribly heavy, about 55. And it's got superb stall characteristics. One of the things in our check that we do every year is we do stalls, and the airplane is a beautifully stalling airplane.
Tell me a little bit about the landing gear. What kind of gear does it have on it?
Metal. It's retractable landing gear.
Right.
It's really kind of a cool system. It retracts straight up. So when it's retracted all the way, about half of the tire still shows. Mm-hmm. So if you have a problem and cannot get the wheels down, you can if you have a reasonably long airport, you can shut both engines down, get the propellers horizontal. Yep. It's a two-bladed propeller, and you can land the airplane, and it will not damage the airplane at all.
We haven't tried that, so let's not. Let's not jinx us here. Knock on some wood.
I was just wondering what whether it's they got oleo struts or some other shock absorber system, but that was pretty interesting in itself. So it's great information.
They're just hydraulic struts. So okay, it doesn't bounce on landing unless you really mess it up. So when you land it, if you do a 3-point or a 3-point landing, it'll stay on the ground very nicely. It's not like an early Cessna 120 or 140 that wants to bounce.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was wondering as a trainer, if it had a somewhat forgiving landing gear to keep the trainees from bouncing the airplane down the runway.
As long as you don't drop it in from too far. If you drop it in from a foot or so, it'll be a nice firm landing, but it'll do just fine.
Good. Why is there, and I'm going to go way out there for you, a little trivia that one of our viewers said, but why was Wichita such a epicenter of aircraft manufacturing? It seems like a relatively, I don't know, you're in the middle of the country. Interesting place to do it.
It's more like the middle of nowhere. It turns out Wichita has an awfully few days of bad weather. And I'm talking about rain. Kansas is noted for tornadoes, but there are very few tornadoes coming through our neck of the woods. The only serious tornado we had come through Wichita was like 20 years ago, and the previous one was probably 40 years before that. My understanding is, well, first off, there's been over 100 airplane companies in Wichita. Some obviously lasted longer than others. But the group that really got it going was Cessna, Beech, and Lloyd Stearman. Those three owned a company called the Traveler Company, and the three of them produced some really cool airplanes back in the 30s. And the reason they were able to build them was Wichita is also known for oil. And one of the really big oil companies thought airplanes were really cool. So they financed the Traveler Company through oil. Now, once they started building a few airplanes, other now the engineers and designers that were familiar with airplanes were obviously working for Cessna Beach and Stearman. And then people well, I've got an idea and I want to build a little airplane. And they would come to Wichita. Pretty soon, Beach and Stearman and Cessna obviously had disagreements on what airplanes should progress to, and they split into separate companies. Cessna remained Cessna. Beach built some really slick airplanes. The one that really got them going was a Stagger Wing, which entered air races with the military airplanes, and the Stagger Wing usually won. I mean, it was a high-powered, slick little airplane. And Lloyd Stearman built this biplane trainer, two-place, that they sold to this other, probably, you maybe heard of this company, it's called Boeing. Lloyd Stearman never built any Stearman airplanes. He sold the design to Boeing and they built them. And as you know, Boeing really took off. So
That was a good point.
the reason airplanes were built in Wichita is because there was oil here.
Wow. Okay. And good weather.
And good weather.
Do you happen to know is Cessna still producing anything in Wichita?
Oh yes.
Yep.
Cessna and Beach are both owned by a company called Textron now.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Cessna still builds little airplanes and bigger airplanes. They build them all the way from the Cessna 172 to the Citation 10. The Citation 10 is the fastest business jet, or at least it was 5 years ago, the fastest business jet in the world. It'll cruise at like 0.92 Mach number. They built, I don't remember now, about 12 models of jet Citation airplanes. And they build the Cessna 172, 182, 206, and the single engine Caravan, model 208, which is a turboprop. And if you've ever been to a little airport, not a little airport, but a smaller city, FedEx is a co-owner and designer of the Cessna 208 Caravan airplane. So Cessna builds a lot of airplanes. Beach was bought by Textron about 5 years ago, I guess. And they pretty much settled down. They build the big King Airs. It's a twin engine turboprop ranging from 11,000 pounds to 20,000 pounds. It's a very popular military airplane. The military uses them all over the East, the Far East, Afghanistan, Iraq. That was their big thing. The military was looking for some airplanes to do surveillance, and they were going to buy a couple of 737s, and they found out you could buy 10 Beach King Airs for the same price, and instead of having one radar, you had 10. So I don't think they bought any 737s, but they bought a whole slew of King Airs.
Twice the aircraft, half the cost.
Yeah, that's right.
A tenth of the cost. Anyway, so yeah, they're still building airplanes in Wichita.
Good. We're gonna test the limits of technology here. We talked about this the other day. Can you do a quick walk around of the airplane?
Yeah, we can do that.
If
Yeah.
the
I had to
Wi-Fi
shut my
and everything.
phone off earlier to make sure that
Okay.
we're getting some feedback. So just give me a second, log back in.
Were there any more questions anybody called in?
Well, let's see. Just looking through the. Oh, somebody. Norman liked your answer about the speeds. 90. He said there's a gentleman at Corsicana who has a PT-19, and he says all the speeds on the PT-19 are 80. So.
Yes, 80.
And if you're a Cub driver, everything's at 60, right? Do people ever get this airplane confused with other, tail dragger twins, like a C-45?
The C-45 and the Bobcat are mixed up all the time. The C-45 Beech 18, it's also called a twin Beech.
Mhm.
It's about it's got it's a much bigger airplane. And the easy way to tell them apart, if you can see our picture, the Bobcat has a single tail, and the Beech 18 has twin vertical stabilizers and rudders.
Mhm.
So they're really easy to tell apart. But from a distance, there's a lot of folks who confuse the two.
Sure. Justin,
I think Justin just showed us as a
Yeah.
picture up there of the instrument panel. back up just about 6 inches, Justin. There you go. That's the whole instrument panel. And it's, except for the radios, which you really can't see underneath the, on the bottom of the panel, that's an original 1943 instrument panel. Go up a little real close now, Justin, go close.
You want to walk them through one side, Ben? We'll just go right over to the other.
Yeah, just stay right there. You can see it's got standard mechanical instruments, nothing very sophisticated. There's a good one. You know, it's got airspeed and altitude and a compass, turn and bank. On the lower corner, you can see all the switches. That works all the lights.
Oh, yes.
And if Justin doesn't fall out of the airplane, we'll show you some more.
Sorry, I was trying to close the window so I wouldn't keep knocking the camera over. Some guy never taught me how to use manual windows, so I guess I had to learn on my own.
Why don't you show the center throttle area? And the center, that's World War II vintage stuff. The red knobs are the mixtures. The left 2 are the throttles. The right, the center 2 that are down are the carburetor heat. And then the one up and one back are the 2 propeller controls. So that pretty much runs the power plant systems in the airplane. What can you give me? Step out the door and just show them the idea of how big the airplane is.
Generalized wing area. It's relatively large.
There's the wing. Now swing around the other way. There's the engine. It's the part we're doing maintenance on it. Now, if you look in the cockpit, you'll be able to see how big the back seat is. There you go. There's a front seat. There's the back seat. For 4 people, it's very comfortable. Let's see. What else can we? Let's show them some of the fabric. Let's show them the tail. Just.
Way to walk
Now
over
you
to
can see that all the stuff we're looking at now is all fabric covered. The longerons on the fuselage are metal, but otherwise everything's wood. All the stuff we're looking at now, the rudder and the horizontal, that's all wood, fabric covered. The only metal you see in there is the attachment fittings, and obviously there's some wires and things in there. The engines are all apart, so they're not going to be much help to you.
I can still walk over to them, Ben.
Okay, why don't you go show them the right-hand engine?
Okay, give me 1 second.
Yep. Hey, Ben, as Justin is making his way over the engine, what?
There's a left-hand engine. We have 2 cylinders off of it.
Okay.
Let's go to the other engine, Justin.
Ben, what kind of concessions have you had to make for modern sort of improvements for the airplane? Yeah, I know you want to keep it as original as possible, but maybe some of the things that you've had to modernize.
Well, it's got obviously a 2-way radio in it.
Mm-hmm.
We have ADS-B in it. No, we don't. We're talking about putting ADS-B in it, but it does have a transponder. It turns out here in Wichita, we don't need an ADS-B system, so we haven't put one in, but we're still talking about it. I'm trying to think of what else is modern. There's not much modern in this airplane. We put an oil filter on the left side of the engine. Justin, if you go to the other side of the engine, you'll see the oil filter. But otherwise, it's all stock airplane. There's an oil there. We broke down and put a real oil filter in it. I'm not sure why. We've never collected anything in the oil filter, but it's pretty much a 1943 airplane.
About how long does it take for you to do the winter maintenance on the airplane?
It depends on how much we find wrong. I'm an A&P. I do most of the maintenance, but our maintenance officer is Earl Long. He's the AI. He usually spends about 3 hours going through everything. You know, we look at the engines very carefully. All the connections for everything. You can come back, Justin.
Actually, Justin, before you come back, one of our viewers wants to know if you can go back into the cockpit. I think they want a little another look at the instrument panel.
Sure, I suppose I can do that. This is why I
But basically, the inspection winds up looking at every connection, electrical connection, a mechanical connection, all the engine connections, obviously all the flight control connections, all the hinges. So there's a lot of that stuff on the airplane. So that's the primary thing. And then of course we have to inspect the fabric and the wood. I think if you really got to it, probably 3 of us could do the inspection in a week. Assuming we didn't find anything seriously wrong. Right now we have 2 cylinders out being worked on. So that's a month project right by itself. So,
right.
It's going to take us most of the winter to get it back together. Okay. What was the question on the instrument panel? That's the instrument panel.
Steve, was there a question on it, or just the viewer wanted to just see the panel?
Yeah. Is there redundancy in the instruments on the panel?
The only redundancy is there's two instruments. Obviously, one engine has a set of instruments, and the other engine also has a set of instruments. Other than that, there's no redundancy in the airplane.
Okay.
It does have a few that are not, you don't see in your normal airplane today. We have carburetor heat for both engines. These round engines have a tendency to ice up. So it has, we have 2 instruments, one for each engine for carburetor heat. We have vacuum on both engines and all the other oil pressure, oil temperature, cylinder head temperature, fuel pressure. So these multi-needle instruments each have a purpose. But there's no redundancy.
Okay. As we're looking at the cockpit, how wide is the cockpit itself?
I don't know. I would say about 4 feet.
Okay. So it's definitely not it's not a roomy cockpit, but you're not crowded either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's got the it's a very roomy airplane.
Steve, the average width of a male at 18 years old a couple of years ago, 40 inches. The only reason I know this, that's a weird number to know. I know my military background, I had to know this number for certain military applications. And I would say being the average shoulder width of 40 inches, you could squeeze 3 people in the cockpit. If it was a bench seat, you could probably fit them shoulder to shoulder just fine, to give you some perspective.
Okay. That's nice. And our viewers are enjoying the up close look at the instrument panel there.
It has a really horrible fuel system. Right now, Justin, stay pointed down for a second. There's 3 levers. One selects which fuel tank you're using. Each engine runs out of the same fuel tank. So if you run out of fuel in that tank, both engines quit. So the right one tells you which tank you're using. The left one says which engine you're feeding. In this case, it's selected to both because it's going to operate both the left and the right. And then the bottom lever is a cross feed, which all it does is it provides fuel pressure from each engine to both engines. So if you have an engine and if you have a fuel pump failure on takeoff, you'll still be fed fuel pressure because it's a low wing airplane. You have to have a pump. So both pumps feed both engines when it's in cross feed. It doesn't move fuel from left to right or right to left. It just provides fuel pressure to both engines.
So you can't transfer fuel from one tank to the other. It just feeds the engines.
Correct. You cannot transfer fuel.
And I think you may have said this before. What's the cruise fuel burn?
We fly plane 30 gallons an hour.
Yeah.
There's the back seat. You can see there's 3 cushions. There's 3 places to sit. But we find unless you're flying children, it's much more comfortable with 2.
Sure. Now, bringing that up, that this is an airplane that is available for rides. That's correct.
Yes. We try and sell rides. an awful lot of people get a real thrill out of flying an old airplane. And I mentioned we don't fly the airplane very much, so we've gone to two crew. We have a pilot in the left seat and a second pilot in the right seat, and we'll fly 2 or 3 people in the back seat, depending on how big they are. Usually 2 adults will go. We charge $300 for a half-hour ride, and we've been having fairly good luck with that. I don't quite understand today's money system, but apparently $300 is no big deal to most folks. So if one wants to go, they'll find a friend and they'll both pitch in $150 and we'll give them a half-hour ride.
Well, that's awesome because that is kind of an affordable flight in a vintage World War II aircraft. I mean, it's there's lots of airplanes in the CAF fleet that you can take a ride in, from some of the smaller trainers all the way up to the B-17, the B-29, the B-24, P-51 Mustang. But this is a twin engine. It's a little stronger than some of the trainers, some of the single engine trainers, but still, I would think a very, very affordable and pretty awesome ride in a vintage aircraft.
We have never had a complaint about a ride. Everybody walks out with a big smile. Thanks, Justin.
That's the most important part. All right.
What else can we tell you? We've been at it about 45 minutes. I don't want to run anybody out of interest.
Well, how can folks get involved with the Jayhawk Wing?
We have a monthly meetings. We're meeting on Saturday mornings. And we meet at our CF hangar in Southwest Wichita. Anybody's welcome to come visit and is encouraged. What we've decided to do the last lately is we're going to have kind of a luncheon on Saturday morning, late morning, a luncheon, and then after the luncheon we're going to have our monthly meeting. And we found that if you provide food, more people want to come, and that's the whole idea. So if anybody would like to come visit, we'd love to have them.
Steve, they can also visit us online too. You can do the Instagram. Our Instagram handle is at CAF_Jayhawk Wing. You can also find us on Facebook, which is CAF Jayhawk Wing as well. And if you want to check our website out, it's CAFJayhawks.org. We'll also be kind of ramping up the YouTube presence as well. So when we go somewhere, and I know Ben is obviously a Hollywood type guy, we'll make sure we'll have hook him up to a camera or two. So if you want to be part of our, as I like to say, our virtual frequent flyer miles, you can follow along as we take the aircraft places and see how the run up is and the process and that sort of stuff.
That's awesome. I definitely look forward to that. When you take riders, can they sit in the front seat, or is it just in the back seat?
Right now, we're just putting them in the back seat.
Back seat. Okay. It's one of the questions from our audience.
I have given rides. If one person who is a pilot wants to go, we can only do it with one person. We can't do it with anybody in the back seat. But since I'm the instructor in the airplane, I'm comfortable flying in the left seat and letting another pilot be in the right seat. And we've done that for rides a few times. But that case, only the one person gets to pay the $300.
Right. All right. Well, just a couple of minutes before we wrap up, Justin, I know you alluded to the fact that you're studying to become a commercial pilot, which is awesome at Kansas State. But also, and you mentioned your military experience as well. But you have a nonprofit that you are also involved in, which helps support our military veterans. And I didn't want to get away without giving you a chance to talk about that a little bit.
I appreciate it, actually. I just mentioned it to you in casual conversation before. But if you're up in the Northeast, you kind of support the troops. I don't want to say as they're deployed, but things are obviously winding down. The Adopt a Soldier Platoon in New Jersey, they're a great organization. They essentially give back 98 cents of every dollar back to the troops through my entire time being deployed to Afghanistan and Kuwait and Iraq. If I message them and said, hey, I want to get an Xbox or a couple bags of beef jerky, they would all of a sudden show up with a tent full of beef jerky. I think during my first deployment, we asked for we asked for 4 Xboxes. We ended up getting 8. So they'll certainly support. And if you find yourself wanting to support or network, they're a great organization for it.
Great.
I
And-
think our computer's about to die here, Steve. I
Uh-oh.
think we better get done here.
Okay. Justin, if they want to support that program, how can they find out more information?
They can go onto our website, like I mentioned before. They can come down to the hangar on Saturdays. They can.
And there we go. Well, I guess the battery life is just under an hour for Ben's laptop. But again, on the screen here, you can see where the Jayhawk Wing is located: Westport Airport, Wichita, Kansas. Oh, there we are.
Sorry about that.
That's
Technical
okay.
Yeah, they can check us out at the airport here. They can that address is on their screen and also on the website. They can also go ahead and find us on Instagram and contact us directly through there.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Ben and Justin, for spending some time with us tonight. And one last question: why is there a stop sign on your ceiling?
That's an airplane. All the stuff on our ceiling are flying radio controlled airplanes.
Ah,
And that's
okay.
my stop sign. It's actually flown.
There we go. You learn something new every day. Well, again, thank you for joining us tonight. And don't forget to click the like, subscribe, or follow button so we can let you know about our future shows. And if you have any ideas for topic gentlemen you'd like to hear from, like Justin and Ben, or airplanes you'd like to learn more about, just drop Leah Block a note at media@cafhq.org. Again, thank you to Justin Coletti and Ben Sorenson for being with us tonight. Until next time, for the Commemorative Air Force, I'm Steve Buss. Have a good night.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate
Good
it.
night.